Okay, so Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shekidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. So this week we break from the laws that were presented in the portion Yitro, the 10 Commandments, and two more people are coming in. Here we go. Okay, so this week I said the bracha already. This week we shift the focus from law, from the portion Mishpatim last week, in which were presented a civil law code, that is laws governing society, relationships between people, and also the 10 Commandments that were given the week before in the portion Yitro. And there's always a comment, as there is lengthy comment on page 485 in the Eitz Chaim, whatever edition of Chumash were chapter 25 of Exodus, the lengthy comment there as to how we understand this portion, which actually starts. It's this portion. Then the next 5 portions are really about the design and then the construction of the tabernacle, the Mishkan, the desert sanctuary. And the question is, what does it have to do here with what came before? And I think the key to it is chapter 24, which serves as a transition between the laws and the Mishkan. So I actually, even though I said we're on 485, I actually want to go back to 476, or chapter 24 of Exodus, which is the last chapter, the last section in the portion Mishpatim. I want to look at that, and I think then we'll understand where the portion Truma is coming from. So the laws that were presented end in chapter 23. And then chapter 24 now, the laws are presented, chapter 24, then God, said to Moses, come up to the Lord with Aaron, Nadav, and Avihu, and 70 elders of Israel, and bow low from afar. Nadav and Avihu, we have to keep those names in mind for a few weeks from now when we get to the portion Shmini, which is the third portion in the book of Leviticus. We're going to be reading that portion at the last Shabbat in March. I believe it's a bat mitzvah that Shabbat. Nadav and Avihu play a crucial role in that portion. And I think what happens here might suggest what happens in the portion Shmini. So Nadav and Avihu are the 2 older sons of Aaron. Aaron has 4 sons. 2 of them are listed here. So God says to Moses, come up to God with Aaron, so that's his brother, Nadav and Avihu, those are his nephews, and 70 elders of Israel. Okay, so 73 people are coming up with Moses to the mountain. Moses alone shall come near the Lord, but others shall not come near, nor shall the people come up with him. Okay, so they come up some of the way. Moses goes up the rest of the way. Moses went and repeated to the people all the commands of the Lord and all the rules. So seemingly what we heard of the 10 Commandments at the end of the portion Yitro, and then everything that came here in the portion Mishpatim. And all the people answered with one voice, saying, all the things that the Lord has commanded, we will do. Kol hadvarim asher diber Adonai naaseh. Okay, Moses then wrote down all the commands of the Lord. Early in the morning, he set up an altar at the foot of the mountain with 12 pillars for the 12 tribes of Israel. He designated some young men among the Israelites, and they offered burnt offerings and sacrificed bulls as offerings of well-being to the Lord. Moses took one part of the blood and put it in basins, and the other part of the blood he dashed against the altar. Then he took the record of the covenant, read it aloud to the people, and they said, "All that the Lord has spoken, we will faithfully do." So this is the famous line, Kol asher diber Adonai na'aseh v'nishma, as opposed to what was on the previous page, Kol hadvarim asher diber Adonai na'aseh. Here it's Kol asher diber Adonai, everything that God said, na'aseh v'nishma, we will do and we will hear. So literally, we will do and we will hear, or it could be we will do and we will obey. So if it's we will do and we will hear, leads to an interesting take on that to show how loyal, dedicated the people of Israel were, that they're willing to do everything, and then we'll hear about it later. Just know that we're willing to do it. Okay, so do first, hear later. Na'aseh v'nishma. Okay, so that's the kind of the midrash in which the Israelites come across as the most loyal, the best generation of all, because they were willing to do and then hear later. Okay, so that's based on this phrase right here. Okay, verse 8 in chapter 24. Again, we're looking at the end of last week's portion to understand why we're building the tabernacle in this week's portion, Truma. So verse 8, page 478 in the Eitz Chaim, Moses took the blood, dashed it on the people, and said, "This is the blood of the covenant that the Lord now makes with you concerning all these commands." Then Moses and Aaron, Nadav and Avihu, and 70 elders of Israel ascended, and they saw the God of Israel. This is key now, these couple of verses. They saw the God of Israel. Under his feet, there was the likeness of a pavement of sapphire, like the very sky for purity. Yet he did not raise his hand against the leaders of the Israelites. They beheld God, and they ate and drank. So it's a bizarre, mystical thing that is happening here, a vision that Moses, Aaron, Nadav, and Avihu, and the 70 elders had of God on God's throne on a pavement of sapphire. Okay, so they... Right, so we'll look at the commentary below in a second. It's just that the description of God and God's throne and God's heavenly court, descriptions of that are few and far between in the Bible. So there's this quick one here. There is Moses asking to see God face to face, and Moses seeing God's back only. There is the ladder that Jacob has a dream of angels ascending and descending this ladder to heaven. And then in the prophets, you have Isaiah's vision of the heavenly court with the fiery angels. You have Ezekiel's chariot, and he sees, that's the Haftarah for the first day of Shavuot, he sees God's heavenly throne also, and there's sapphire there too. So all of these, in the mystical tradition of Judaism, serve as a basis for intense study and meditation to try to actually see this in real life. Okay, so the fact that Moses, Aaron, Nadav, and Avihu, and 70 elders of Israel were granted were allowed to see God's throne and the sapphire pavement is truly remarkable and a truly spiritual experience. Okay, so the sapphire throne, right, this blue stone was supposed to represent the color of the sky. So not sure. Sapphire is, from what I picture of sapphire, it's usually a darker blue than the sky is, but perhaps the sky, as it heads into dusk, can have that shade of blue that is sapphire, so that when we look up at the heavens at a particular time of day, we can imagine as if we're seeing God's throne or God's court. And so this is what they see. They see this, that God's throne and the pavement of sapphire. Then verse 12, the Lord said to Moses, come up to me on the mountain and wait there, and I'll give you the stone tablets with the teachings and commandments which I have inscribed to instruct them. So Moses and his attendant Joshua arose. First time we see Joshua in this chapter. It's Aaron and his nephews and the 70 elders. And here Joshua appears without being introduced before. So Moses and his attendant Joshua arose, and Moses ascended the mountain of God. To the elders he had said, wait here for us until we return to you. You have Aaron and Hur with you. Who's Hur? Another name added here that we haven't seen before. It's Aaron and Nadav and Avihu and anonymous 70 elders. Now we have Joshua, who's named. Maybe he's one of the 70 elders, but he's an attendant. And Hur, who's Hur? We don't know anything about him either. You have Aaron and Hur with you. Let anyone who has a legal matter approach them. I'm going to be gone for a while. Approach Aaron and Hur if you have an issue. When Moses had ascended the mountain, the cloud covered the mountain. The presence of the Lord abode on Mount Sinai, and the cloud hid it for 6 days. On the 7th day, he called to Moses from the midst of the cloud. Now the presence of the Lord appeared in the sight of the Israelites as a consuming fire on the top of the mountain. Moses went inside the cloud and ascended the mountain, and Moses remained on the mountain 40 days and 40 nights. Okay, so we have Moses, Aaron, Nadav, and Avihu, and the 70 elders see God's throne and the sapphire floor. All of Israel sees a cloud, and Moses ascending the mountain, walking into that cloud, and sees the presence of God as a consuming fire. So incredible spiritual experience that the entire community has. More so for Moses, Nadav and Avihu, Aaron, and the elders, because they see the throne, but all of the people see the consuming fire and the cloud that Moses walks into. Okay, so some incredible, awesome experience that the entire community has at this point. Okay, so now I'd like to take a look below the line on 478, where it begins at the bottom right there for verse 10. They saw the God of Israel, and then it continues on 479. So I'd like to see what this says about this vision, and then we'll get to talking about Truma. What does this strange passage mean about the heavenly court and the sapphire pavement? Could it be that 70 elders saw God while eating and drinking, right? Because they're eating and drinking also. Yet we imagine a spiritual experience to be one in which, well, usually people fast in order to heighten the senses and be able to make one more amenable to having such a spiritual experience. So what's the eating and drinking doing here? What happens to people who experience the presence of God in an unusually intense and vivid way? The Talmud chooses not to take the passage literally, understanding it to mean that experiencing God took the place of eating and drinking for these elders, as it did for Moses during his 40 days on the mountaintop. So the experience was a physically sustaining experience. the Talmud is suggesting that by being there for 40 days was enough to miraculously allow Moses to stay alive. In the presence of God, the commentary goes on, ordinary physical needs are transcended, and one forgets about the need to eat and drink. In a similar vein, Maimonides maintains that seeing God refers to intellectual perception rather than sensory experience. They did not actually see anything. They came to understand the reality of God more clearly. As one might say, I see. So Maimonides, as a true rationalist who doesn't take stock in these sensory experiences or these spiritual experiences, say that one can get a sense of spirituality from study, from intense study, and so this is what they perceived while they were studying. The references to eating and drinking may be the Torah's way of suggesting that the encounter with God was more than an intellectual encounter. It engaged all of the senses. Or it may reflect the anti-ascetic side of Judaism. We need not turn our back on the material experience of this world in the quest for God's presence. God may be found in eating and drinking as readily as in praying. So, my point in bringing this section, before we even start looking at Truma, about the beginning of the commandment for the design of the sanctuary, is to understand this intense spiritual experience that Moses, his brother, his nephews, and 70 elders had, and also the experience that the entire people had, this spiritual experience, this intense, overwhelming, awesome sight that they had that has not been, that was only seen again by individual prophets and has not really been seen again ever in the history of the Jewish people. And so when we think of spirituality, when we think of studying as a form of trying to get close to God, that's how I see study, and that's the experience I try to have when I study Jewish text, to see it as a spiritual experience, or coming to synagogue to pray, or even personal prayer, should be an attempt to see a little bit of what is described here in this chapter, which we just read. That the idea of connecting to God is trying to have some type of spiritual experience that will transform our lives. So we have laws to follow as presented in Mishpatim and as interpreted by the rabbis in the Mishnah and the Talmud and subsequent legal texts over the generations, to that those Jewish law and practices and observances are all opportunities that we can do to try to connect with God. So the 613 commandments, as begun to be laid out in the portion of Mishpatim, are that, not to restrict our behavior or define our conduct, but also really as opportunities to connect with God. So it is a mitzvah, a commandment to light the Shabbos candles, and we do it when we light the candles. There's a right way to do them. Okay. But really, the purpose of lighting the candles is to bring, to transform our homes into a Shabbat environment, right? So lighting candles, it's a mitzvah. It's one of the 613 commandments. So it's an action that we perform, but it's not simply that. It is also meant to be a spiritual experience. Okay, so all of the rules that are defined by Jewish practice are not just rules that regulate our lives and distinguish us from other people in the world, or distinguish us as a race. Tell that to Whoopi Goldberg. But also they are opportunities for spirituality. Okay, so that's how we have to understand it. Some people criticize the whole Jewish legal system and don't find any meaning in it. Okay, you can criticize it, but really the point of all the laws is to help us connect to God. Okay, so that's one thing about the portion Mishpatim. And then this chapter that we just read is the other kind of spiritual experience, this intense activity. And how do you replace that? Or how do you try to relive it? If not, by trying to build a sanctuary for God on earth. If you see God's home in heaven on a throne and the sapphire pavement, then maybe you'd want to build a replica in which God's presence can dwell down on earth. And that, I think, then helps us understand what the portion Truma is doing. That Truma and next week's portion Tetzaveh and part of the portion Kitisa and then Vayakel and Precede are all about how we build a home for God on earth to try to bring that throne and sapphire pavement down to earth. Okay, so let's look now at on page 485 with the commentary here on the page and see how Eitz Chaim suggests what Truma's place here is in the order of readings. So if we look on the bottom, below the line on 485, the last third of the book of Exodus concerns himself entirely, except for the incident of the golden calf, which we'll do in 2 weeks, with the construction of the tabernacle, a portable shrine to house the ark, and the tablets of the pact. After the life-altering experience of standing at Sinai, how does one keep the feeling of Sinai present? Okay, so the portion Truma, again, like what I've been saying about reliving the Sinai experience, whether it's just the average Israelite seeing Moses walk into the cloud and seeing the consuming fire, or the more specific vision that the elders had. It can be maintained with sacred deeds, daily acts of justice and compassion as outlined in the previous Parsha Mishpatim. It can be accomplished by maintaining the observance of sacred time on Shabbat and holy days, right? So it could be sacred deeds, sacred time, or it can be maintained with sacred space. So it's sacred deeds, time, and space that define Judaism, fashioning a physical site to represent the presence of God in the midst of the community. Typically, the Torah and later Jewish usage will blend all three modes, deeds, space, and time, in an integrated way of life. The ultimate goal is to break through the barriers and come into the presence of God. But that goal is not attained in an instant. There is a ladder of spiritual ascent, alluded to in the prayer which precedes the Shema in our morning service, where the text moves from the study of Torah to the performance of mitzvot to bonding with God. Okay, so that's our goal every day, every week, every year, as we become more accustomed to doing Jewish things, to doing Jewish, and to studying more, and to doing more, then our spiritual sense gets heightened so that maybe we can experience what the elders experienced on Mount Sinai. The commentary goes on, Mount Sinai does not retain its holiness after the Israelites move on. It does not become a site of pilgrimage. right? Which is true. We have no idea where Mount Sinai is in the Sinai Peninsula. The mountain is not holy. God is, well, so I'll just backtrack there for a second. The Christians thought, well, there was a tradition as which mountain in Mount Sinai was, in the Sinai Peninsula was Mount Sinai. There's a monastery called Santa Caterina that is at the foot of a mountain that had also been called in Arabic Jebel Musa, which means Mount Moses. So there is a tradition associated, an ancient tradition, so because this monastery goes back at least 1,000 years, if not 1,500 years, where they think the burning bush is, and where the monks had over the years built in steps into the side of the mountain to climb all the way up. I've been there, and I know I've talked about this before. When I was in Israel for my junior year at Hebrew University, there was a trip offered for the overseas students to the Sinai, and we slept overnight in a Bedouin camp at the foot of Mount Sinai, and then before dawn started climbing the mountain. So we climbed on a path up the mountain, got to the top of the mountain where the tour guide said, maybe this is Mount Sinai, we don't know, but it was pretty cool to be up on Mount Sinai, and then walked down the steps that the monks had built into the mountain. So that was a pretty cool experience. And that trip happened a month or two after that part of the Sinai was handed over to Egypt. So the trip still went on, and had to bring our passports on the trip and get it stamped with an Egyptian stamp. Anyway, it was pretty cool. But and we were the only ones there. That's the point of this, connecting that it's not a site of pilgrimage, right? As opposed to the old city of Jerusalem, which is a site of pilgrimage. However, if it's not COVID time, millions of visitors come to Jerusalem every year, Muslim, Christian, and Jewish, to see the holy sites there. And the Sea of Galilee is a site of pilgrimage for Christians, to either the Jordan River, to be baptized there, to see the places where Jesus supposedly performed miracles along the shores of the Galilee. But in terms of Jewish sites of pilgrimage, certainly the old city and the Temple Mount and the Western Wall are sites of pilgrimage. Mount Sinai is not. The commentary goes on, when the people leave Sinai, they do not leave God. God accompanies them on their journey, and the tabernacle is to be a symbol of that. The later temples built in Jerusalem by Solomon and by the Jews returning from Babylonia did not follow the plan given here. Different generations build their houses of worship in ways appropriate to their own times and needs, right? So that's why there's no set architectural design for synagogues, right? You go into Sephardic synagogues in from medieval Europe versus Sephardic synagogues today, Ashkenazi synagogues from medieval Europe, Ashkenazi synagogues today. There's a variety of styles. There are certain features that are the same, the Ner Tamid, the eternal light, and the ark where the Torah scrolls are housed, but how the seats are arranged and where the bima is situated, all different based on styles, right? And then it all depends on architecture in America too, from our very simple yet beautiful design of our sanctuary here in Olney versus other synagogues that we're aware of around the country that we've been to. Some, the Yiddish term could be ungepatscht, kind of over the top in their kind of design, to very simple and everything in between. Okay, I'd like to go on to now. Let's look at the first couple of sentences of Terumah on 485 and 486. Vaydaber Adonai el Moshe lemor. God spoke to Moses, saying, Daber el bnei Yisrael, speak to the people of Israel, v'yikhu li Terumah. They should take for me gifts. So the English again is deceptive. As tell the Israelite people to bring me gifts. Okay, that makes more sense in English. The Hebrew, speak to the people of Israel, they should take for me gifts. So the Hebrew's awkward. How do you take for God? You give God, take for God gifts. So that it's just an unusual unusual formulation in the Hebrew. All right, take for me gifts. Me'et kol ish asher yidvenu libo, from all people whose hearts are willing. Tikhu et trumati, you should take my gift. Okay, so people should be willing to give, and the gifts should be taken and taken for God, not given to God, taken for God. Okay, so the Hebrew is unusual. So let's look below the line. To bring me gifts. Hebrew v'yikhu li, gifts from what was originally mine and which I shared with you. So perhaps that's what it refers to. Why the awkward Hebrew? Well, these things belonged to me before, you're just taking them back from me. The gold, silver, and jewels that the Israelites would give were taken from the Egyptians when they left Egypt. They were not to be used for personal benefit, but for something holy and transcendent. Remember when the Egyptians showered the Israelites with gold and silver when they were leaving Egypt, the idea is that the gold and silver would be used now for the building of the tabernacle. Okay, so it wasn't for their own personal gain, the gold and silver, but rather to give back to God. The verb here translated bring, vayikhu, literally means take. One who gives receives something in return. The sense of being generous and making a worthy undertaking possible, the sense of sharing with others in an important venture, the sense of self-worth that comes from knowing that we can give away something of value without feeling diminished. Okay, so this is a theme that is common among people who are generous of their resources, that they feel that it's not a sacrifice. They feel that it's not a burden to them to be charitable and philanthropic, but rather is a sense of giving back and sharing. Okay, it's like, I don't know, Jeff Bezos's wife, ex-wife, and the tens of millions of dollars that she has given away, or former Mayor Bloomberg and the extremely generous gifts he gave to historically Black colleges and universities. So people like that who give away tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars to give back. Now, to be cynical, it's a great tax advantage for them to give all that money away. But not to be cynical, it's a sense, not everybody does it, right? So the sense of, gratitude for this, the personal wealth to then give back and do something positive with it. Okay. So the commentary goes on. The word Truma, gift or offering, comes from a root meaning to elevate, right? So the camp arm of the conservative movement is called Camp Ramah, so to be elevated. So it's the same root. It originally referred to the physical act of lifting up that which was being offered. It can also imply that the act of offering a gift to God elevates the donor to a higher level as well. So a nice Hasidic commentary there, that by the physical act of lifting up this gift as it's being offered, it also lifts you up spiritually. Those who collect for charitable purposes must do so with only pure and noble purposes in mind. But those who give to charity may do so even for less worthy reasons. The act of giving will purify them. So the point of giving charity is not that it has to be done with pure intention. You can even be forced to give to charity, and it's still credited for good for you. One commentator asks why the laws of Mishpatim directly precede the offering of Truma, and suggests it teaches that only after we make our living honestly, right? Because a lot of Mishpatim talks about our business relationships with others. Only after we make our living honestly can we give any proceeds to charity, right? So we have an honest living, then we can honestly give to charity. Okay. And there's one other comment I wanted to share today, which I think is a typical midrashic comment, and that is found on page 493, when we're told what kind of wood the people are supposed to use to build the tabernacle, right? Remember, they're in a desert. Desert, by definition, means not too much flora and fauna around. Because if there was there, it wouldn't necessarily be a desert. Okay, so where did these trees come from to supply the wood for the tabernacle? So it's what's chosen is acacia wood, right? So on 493, chapter 23, verse 15, chapter 26, 15. It says, you shall make the planks for the tabernacle of acacia wood. Okay, Acacia shitim, acacia wood. Okay, so I just happened to Google. I can type on my computer in Hebrew. Everybody can. You go to you can go on your computer and just have it install a Hebrew font. It's built in. And you can type in Hebrew on your computer. So I type in Hebrew sometimes because I do Google search in Hebrew. So I put in Acacia shitim and a Wikipedia article comes up. There's Hebrew Wikipedia also. And it has a picture of, it says in English, acacia in the Hebrew article. So it's always known that shitim or shita, singular, is acacia. Okay, and it has a picture of an acacia tree. So just Google it on your own. You'll see what acacia tree looks like, and you'll see a map of the world where acacia trees grow. And it's like a huge equatorial region all around the globe, all different kinds of species of acacia trees, which have like a unique shape to them. So it has almost like a single trunk, which branches out, and then the canopy of the tree has like this long. It's not it's not like an oak tree or a rounded maple tree, but rather like a flat top stretching out kind of tree. Okay, so that's what the acacia tree looks like. And the question is, it's the desert. Where are acacia trees coming from? So that's the question for the Midrash. How could these acacia trees be there in the desert? So below the line on 493, why was the acacia tree chosen to be the exclusive source of wood for the ark and for the tabernacle? That's another question. Why the acacia tree? Why not the cedar tree? Right? The cedar of Lebanon is like the redwood of California, a tall, majestic tree. So if you're building a tabernacle to house God's presence, don't you want the most glorified, majestic objects to be part of the design? You're using gold and silver. Why not the best tree as well? Why why the acacia, which, like I said, has a flat top to it, doesn't grow more than maybe 50 feet high. The Midrash suggests that it was chosen because it's not a fruit-bearing tree. God did not want to destroy the future fruit harvests of a tree, even to build the ark. Okay, well, a cedar tree is not a fruit-bearing tree. Okay, so there's lots of Midrash about why the acacia tree is chosen as opposed to others, why the Mount Sinai chosen and not others, why the dove was chosen by Noah as opposed to other animals or birds to leave the ark first, right? There are lots of midrashim all pointing to the humility of the particular object or animal. Where did these acacia trees come from? Get a load of this midrash. They are not native to the Sinai wilderness. Legend has it that the patriarch Jacob planted them on his way to Egypt, foreseeing that one day his grandchildren would need them. He did something of no immediate use to himself for the benefit of future generations. Okay, so this gets to a theme in the Midrash that Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel, and Leah, were prophetic. They weren't just a part of a random family chosen by God, but rather chosen because of their innate spirituality and prophetic abilities. So there's lots of midrash about the patriarchs and matriarchs knowing all the Torah even before the Torah was given. And the midrash like this, in which the patriarchs and matriarchs are doing something for knowing that future generations are going to need it. So we're told back in Genesis that Jacob went down to Egypt with his family to meet Joseph and to escape the famine and to live in Goshen. So it's not so far-fetched if you want to create a story in which the patriarchs and matriarchs foreshadow events that happen later. It's not so far-fetched to say that Jacob took some acacia saplings from central Israel, where maybe acacia trees do grow, and planted them in the desert, knowing that in the future that they will have grown to full height and would be available to make the Mishkan. So it's part of a typical kind of midrash in which Ma'aseh Avot Siman Levanim, the actions of the patriarchs foreshadow the acts of their descendants. So Jacob plants the saplings that will then be used when they're full-grown trees by his descendants to build the Mishkan itself. So it's a beautiful midrash, far-fetched because the text of the Torah doesn't say it, but for the rabbis, there's nothing too far-fetched. It all gets to the rabbinic ideology of glorifying the people in the Torah and saying that and glorifying or mythologizing their acts, like their acts become supernatural in purpose that is kind of different than normal human behavior. Okay, any questions or comments, thoughts? Yes, Barbara.
This may be off on a tangent, but earlier when you spoke about Moses with Aaron and his
Nadav and Avihu, yeah,
nephews, what happened to his sons?
What Moses' sons?
Yeah.
That's a good question. I'm not sure why his sons were never included in this kind of spiritual work. They are mentioned because they are Levites. They become Levitical heads of Levitical families that have specific duties associated with the Mishkan. So there are the Gershonites, and I forget Moses's other son's name, but they become heads of Levitical families. So it's not nothing, but it's not the same as his brother and his nephews. So it's a good question, and I think we'd have to look at the Midrash, which I haven't done, to find out about them and why the Midrash might suggest that it's Aaron's sons and not Moses' sons that reach these heights.
Or even in addition to.
Right. Yeah, Lori.
Yeah, this is sort of a tangent, but you had said lighting the candles is one of the 613
Yes.
commandments. I was just wondering how that came about, because it's not in the Torah, I don't think.
So it's right. It's not in the Torah. The point. So the rabbis, the role of the rabbis of 2,000 years ago and forward from there was to interpret the Torah to make it a living document. Okay, so there's not enough in the Torah to tell us what to do every single moment of every single day. There's enough in the Torah to provide a guideline, but not specific practices to do and rituals to do every day. So the rabbis developed those rituals and guidelines based on particular sentences. So when it says to sanctify the Sabbath day and make it holy, the rabbis say we sanctify the day by saying Kiddush over grape juice or wine and lighting the candles. Okay, that's their definition of how to sanctify the day. And because they said it and nobody else was coming up with alternative ways to sanctify, their ways became the way that we do it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the 613 are rabbinic and
yes.
Okay.
Yes. Now the rabbis would say it's all Moses was taught the 613 commandments on Mount Sinai. So the rabbis say that in order to give themselves the authority to develop the 613 commandments. So it's kind of a circular argument. Okay, the rabbis definitely came up with them, but in order to say that they didn't make it up, but rather they are revealing a tradition that had been there before, they say that Moses received those mitzvot at Mount Sinai also. Okay, so Paul said in the chat, Moses' other son was Eliezer. Yeah, maybe, because I'm trying to remember of Aaron's other sons. After Nadav and Avihu die, there are two other sons who take over, and I forget their names offhand. And but you can look it up easily. And I forget whether one of them is Eliezer. So yes, Gabe.
Earlier you had said that it was humility that was the trait that
yes, why things are chosen.
Why was that? Why that particular trait as opposed to all the other good midot that are out there?
Well, I think that's a trait that the rabbis are trying to teach. It's a common thread throughout rabbinic literature. What kind of attitude we're supposed to have when we pray, what kind of attitude we have when we study, what kind of attitude we have when we are going about our daily affairs and relationship with other people. And that the best attitude to have, kind of personality trait to have, is one of humility as opposed to arrogance. So when one is humble, one allows oneself to be open to other opinions and to other people. When one is arrogant, one thinks that oneself is the best, and when there's no need for other people or other things in life. We are the be all and end all. but a humble spirit allows us to be open to other things, to learn new things, to be with new people, and to be open to God. So that's the sense of the humility then. So then they attach that to, so why is Mount Sinai chosen? Because Mount Sinai didn't come forward like the other mountains did to say, hey, choose me. Look at the great things that I have. Mount Sinai didn't say anything. And according to the Midrash, that's why Mount Sinai was chosen. When all the animals came forward and said, pick me, Noah, to go out first. The dove didn't say anything. And also all the letters of the alphabet came to God. Start the Torah with me. And the letter Bet didn't say anything. But the letter Bet is open, right? And everything comes out of the letter Bet. Everything follows the letter Bet. So, it's just nice midrash to add to the idea of what the rabbis are trying to teach. Be open to others, be humble in spirit. Okay, so we'll stop here for today. Hope everybody stays safe and healthy, and a good rest of the week.
Thank you.
You bet.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank
yeah.
you.
Yeah, thank you.
See you later.
Yeah.